So canine inmate rehabilitation programs are basically when incarcerated individuals who are in correctional facilities are paired with rescue dogs, and these dogs are typically pulled from local shelters, and then the dogs live with the inmates 24/7, like in their cells, and the inmates obedience train the dogs. They are following an obedience training curriculum, and this makes them much more likely to be adopted and desirable for adopters. And I should mention that across the nation, there's a lot of prison animal programs also with cats and horses, but dogs are the most commonly used. But like out west, for example, there's actually a few programs with wild horses in a partnership with the Bureau of Land Management and a correctional facility. So I feel like that's pretty cool. There's an increasing amount of traction.
Wasn't there a movie about wild horses? Yeah, something.
Like The Horse Whisperer or something?
No. Some lady, I think, had a farm or something, and then she was about to lose the farm. Or it's been a while.
Oh.
Yeah. But that's what she used to do. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
But anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry. You said it again?
So, there's a lot. Some of my colleagues at the University of Denver put together a comprehensive look to see how many of these programs are out there, and they documented over 250 prison dog programs in about 47 states. And there's at least 25 here in Florida through the Florida Department of Corrections.
Wow.
And I was doing a little digging, and I saw in the Orlando area, the correctional facility that is Central Florida Reception Center, they pair with a Greyhound rescue, and they're doing a canine inmate program. And then kind of in a larger area in Ocala, both Lowell Correctional and Marion Correctional both have canine inmate programs. So they're kind of spotty around the country. Not every place has them, obviously, and it depends a lot on the resources provided, but they are out there, and they're a really, really cool program.
Now, one thing that I had read, and please clarify this for me, a lot of the dogs that are put into the program are considered quote unquote hard to adopt. They come from broken abuse situations. What makes these dogs with these behavioral challenges the right candidates for the inmates?
Fit.
Okay. Well, a dog does have to be behaviorally assessed before they can go into the program. So basically just to make sure they can get along with other dogs, because they're going to be in a small confined space with other dogs, and they're going to be out in the yard with other dogs. But other than that, if they're from abuse and neglect situations, that would not exclude them. In fact, they can be the best, most excellent candidates for the program, because the attention that they're getting from the person that's training them in the correctional facility helps them transform into more social and well-adjusted dogs. And that's appealing to adopters, of course. But on a deeper level, the human participants, the inmates, can relate to the dogs in their care. They can sometimes relate to the history of the dog, and this bonds them more deeply. So the behavior, or the broken and abused sorts of situations sometimes leads to the best fit for these kinds of programs.
Now, you taught a course on this, right, where you looked at the inmate canine research with students? Yes.
It was a really interesting course. It was summer of 2019. I taught a course called the role of canines in inmate rehabilitation, and UNF had actually awarded some funding for us to travel as well. So we had a couple different segments to the class. The first segment, we traveled to Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Kanab, Utah, which is the largest no-kill animal sanctuary in the U.S., which, as an aside, if anybody wants to take a vacation out west and volunteer with animals, Best Friends is amazing. You can volunteer with horses, dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, pigs, goats. It's beautiful terrain.
The whole farm.
I've gone there. Yeah, I've gone there with my husband. I've gone there several times over various summers to volunteer, and it's really a great experience. Anyway, so I had this connection with Best Friends, and they have a division called Canines with Careers. And Canines with Careers actually assesses rescue dogs to see who they're appropriate to help in terms of prison programs, but also for roles in law enforcement, search and rescue, therapy, and crisis response. So I brought the students out there, and they met with some of the staff with Canines with Careers, and they learned how dogs could be evaluated for work with at-risk groups. So that was one portion of the course, right? And then the students took that information, we brought it back to Jacksonville, and the students got involved with the local canine inmate program, which at the time was known as TAILS, which stands for Teaching Animals and Inmates Life Skills. That's in about 4 or 5 local correctional facilities. And the students and I went into 3 of those facilities multiple times, and they actually sat down and talked to the inmates in the program and learned about their experiences and how the program impacted them. And then the students also, as one of their assignments, they had these reflective journals, so I could actually see and read how they were getting invested in what was going on. So that was kind of what happened in the course.
Now, how did the students kind of act? Because did they come in with certain, I guess, like preconceived notions of what the inmates would be like in terms of their relationships with the dogs and how it sort of would rehabilitate them?
Yes. There were some preconceived notions, and this is a great question because, as I mentioned earlier, most students have limited direct exposure to what's going on in the criminal justice system. And so a lot of them went in and they were expecting to see handcuffs and weapons and a harsh, intimidating environment, right? And this is what we call experiential learning, going out in the field and hands-on experience. Yeah. And that has the potential to play a major role in counteracting stereotypes and myths. And I saw that's exactly what happened with the students. So not shockingly, many of them were apprehensive about going into the prisons, especially like in a couple cases, we had to go through quite a bit of security. And the correctional officers are very matter of fact about what you're doing. I think they got a little uncomfortable, some of them, and then they also anticipated these hardened criminals who were very unapproachable. But the minute that the guys started to talk about their experiences, this changed, right? So it humanized the inmates because the students actually learned about their experiences. They learned how they ended up in prison and what the canine program did for them. So these guys were just human beings. And a couple of the guys in the program got emotional talking about their dogs, especially thinking back on a dog that they got particularly attached to. Yeah. And that really impacted the students too. And they kind of became champions of these guys. They observed things while they were in the prisons that, like in this one case, one of the guys who got emotional about a dog, he was kind of like mocked a little bit for getting choked up by one of the correctional officers, and the students were just outraged. I mean, they were outraged. Later on,
That's
they
good.
said,
That's good.
I mean, they're like, how are the guys supposed to change if they're mocked for showing emotion, And so they really became very attuned to that. What was interesting, though, is that several of them, because, this is public information, they would go and look up the crime later that the guy that they were talking to had committed. Yeah. And they had some, like, dissonance between what they saw when they met that person and then the cold, hard crime that they committed. It was kind of like, okay, it's hard to reconcile those two things, but they definitely got very attached to the idea that these are human beings who need rehabilitation. And I will mention one more thing is that some of them were invested that one of these students, she started her own business where she tried to help inmates out with things that they needed in terms of contacting family and friends, getting legal representation. And then I had another student who started to volunteer with literacy at a women's prison. So they really cared about what was going on, and I think it really changed their perceptions about things.
Touching moment for sure.
What is it that you think? Experience, what is it that you think is the sort of the magic between putting an inmate with a canine? How does that rehabilitation happen?
Well, it's drawn from the human-animal bond, which we know is very effective in a range of therapeutic human contexts. But in this particular case, I mean, I can get into some of how the identity change happened that these guys were experiencing. Do you want me to get into that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so there was the concept of criminogenic masculinity. That's what I was looking at. So this is where men may learn at young ages if they don't have access to kind of like performing masculinity or being a man in the legitimate ways, particularly if they're marginalized due to socioeconomic status and race. Yeah. Criminogenic masculinity is a term that emphasizes an alternative way of being a man through violence, risk-taking, being tough, never backing down. And, of course, that stuff leads to crime, right?
Yeah.
And so being a man in that way becomes bound up in criminal activity. So the idea is that the participants in these programs, through building relationships with the animals, they start to develop a new sense of self, and this interrupts or redirects this criminogenic masculinity because they start to think about themselves differently, and that's what leads to desistance or stopping crime. And I can break that down even further in terms of how that progresses, but that's kind of, in a nutshell.
I really, yes, I want, we have to take a break, but in the break, can you do me a favor and think about what you want to see? I do really want to hear more about it because I do believe while it might not be the be all end all to correct people, criminals, but it is for sure a very, very effective first step, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk some more with Dr. Wesely.
Entrepreneurs in Overdrive.